This was supposed to be about improving steps of my guitar building process, but sometimes things don't go according to plan. In today's tale of woe, we deal with bindings. As I film this, I'm in the middle of it. I don't know how it's going to turn out, but it's not looking all that good at the moment. In our previous build, we had some problems attaching the bindings to the back because I like a lovely curved back, and when the bindings bend to that curve, the waist sticks up, but most importantly, this face turns inward like that. Now my bindings channels are perfectly vertical all the way around, thanks to my enormous jig. And I solved the problem, or attempted to last time, by sanding off a little fillet about here. That was partly successful, but when you consider that at this point here in the middle there's a nice flat line from top to bottom, but here you've got two lines with an angle between them. So I've adopted a slightly different technique for taking out that little fillet. Let me show you. Now I filed out that fillet, and the thickness here is 2 millimeters. It goes down to 1 millimeter and then back to 2. And it's a little bit curved and it's a little bit faceted, and it's just not right. It needs to be perfectly flat crosswise all along that curve. So I'll put it on this little mold, and now I will file lengthways to try and flatten out that face all along the curve, like so. I'm also using the scraper to try and make sure that that is just a perfectly straight face all along the curve that I've filed in. And if I think I've crowned it a bit, just curved it a bit, I can use the rat tail file to try and just take off some in the middles to keep that face perfectly flat. Getting there. Holding it up to the light, I am happy with the flatness of that face. So let's get these bindings glued on. The lighting's not right and there's glue in the way, but that made a beautiful tight join around the waist. I happen to know that not even that approach is enough for the inside of the cutaway. It's pretty obvious when you look at a piece of binding, if we bend the shape of the curve, this area here just tilts and digs in, opening a gap at the outside. It's the customary parade, never ending, of small improvements with the occasional setback. This gap here is very small indeed. I doubt I'll be able to get anything thinner than a shaving in there. On the other hand, there's a gap there and a gap there. Now these will all fill very well with either sawdust and glue or a filler putty, and they will look very good under shellac. Gee, I wish there was a better way to go. I think my idea of wooden bindings really needs thinner bindings, maybe 3-ply. I've been flirting with the idea of using molds to laminate the bindings to their final shape before attempting to attach them to the guitar. There are two problems with that. One is that no matter how carefully I try to align the pieces before gluing, there's going to be some very serious cleanup of that edge that needs to nestle into the channel. Now, the second is that even the most minute difference between the shape of the mould and the shape of the guitar, which varies from guitar to guitar, means that since this laminated piece has far less give, it can be even harder to get the join perfect. So I'm going to put this idea aside, possibly come back to it later, and try something else first. What I'm going to try to do is use a larger number of thinner layers and see if I can do a dry tape up and then attach them using ultra-thin CA glue. I have prepared the channels by sealing them with thinned down shellac. I brushed it on and then wiped it off to reduce the amount of CA glue that will seep into the timbre of the guitar itself. The other thing is that the outermost layer still needs to be thick enough so that I can scrape it back to make it flush with the sides. And this is even more important on the back where we have the curve to accommodate. The dry tape up has gone very well indeed. The clear advantages are that the thinner layers can form much more easily. There is no gap here wider than a hair. And of course I can do it in a leisurely manner because there's no drying glue to put a ticking clock against the process. Speaking of glue, now we have to drizzle CA glue all around the perimeter. My previous use of CA glue has just been a drop here and there for fretboard inlays and dots. So I've turned on the dust extractor to try and keep the fumes out of my face. Now it's only moving them over there. Let's hope it's enough. The gluing went okay. A little bit more glue seeped past the area of wood that I'd sealed and soaked into the timber. When it comes time to finish the guitar, we will discover whether that's a problem or not. But now we need to do the same thing on the back, which is curved. As you may recall, we deal with that by filing away some little fillets at the waist and the inner cutaway. And now that there are a lot of layers, thinner layers, filing that becomes quite a problem because it will leave not very much wood left. So I've bundled them together with tape, and I'm going to try and see if I can do it without making a complete mess of it. That inner layer has gone down to paper thin on that lower edge, there and there, and in fact a little bit beyond. I've actually sanded away to the layer underneath. So now I've got to very carefully remove these bundling pieces of tape and then tape it onto the guitar. After starting the dry tape up, I discovered that what I'd done wasn't enough. So I've actually shaved away a bit more, and as you may be able to see, I've actually gone through the inner layer. Now, obviously in future, I will need to make the inner layer thicker, but let's see how this goes. I've made a couple of silly mistakes that I'll file away to do better next time, and these joins are not perfect. But those lines are the cleanest, tightest, most hairline of any of the guitars that I've made. So I'm going to glue it up, wait a couple of days, and then we'll level it, and then we'll see whether this is the new way to go. I'm starting to have some second thoughts. There's been one little spot of incomplete adhesion. I'll hold judgment until I've done some leveling, and then we'll see how it turns out. Well, after some initial promise, I'm a bit despondent as to how that approach turned out. The superglue seeps underneath the tape and blends with the adhesive to form a mess that is almost impossible to clean or sand off. And because my outer layer was just a bit too thin to help it to conform, I've actually sanded through to the join line in a couple of places. So I'm going to take the drastic step of rerouting the bindings channels and try a hybrid approach where I apply some of the things that I've learnt in this experiment and see if I can't come up with something better. So we're back with the B&D vise and 3 layers. 1.3, 0.7, 1.7. The inner layer is just thick enough to allow us to sand in our tilt fillets, and I have been putting in a couple of extra ones. So not just at the waist and the inside cutaway, but also the outside cutaway or horn, and on the non-cutaway section, the waist and the shoulder. Putting in these extra fillets seems to be improving matters, and having 2 of the layers thinner than they were before also seems to be helping. It's not as good as I'd hoped. Let's see what it looks like after levelling. There's no pretty way of saying this, and I apologise if you were hoping for a happy ending, but these are the worst bindings I have put on any guitar. I've managed to sand through the outer 1.7mm thick layer, not once, but twice. I suspect the reason is that when the guitar was sitting in this cradle while I was routing the bindings channels, it may have been uneven or indeed slipped and tilted, causing the bindings to be not perfectly vertical. Now, if this was a guitar to keep, or heaven forbid sell, I would put a hammer through it and start over. But this is a guitar for a proposed YouTube tonewood comparison video. It's got a lovely Huon pine soundboard, and so I am going to press on. And perhaps after we've made that video, I may put a hammer through it. As for the technique of using thinner layers on the inside, and more of them, logic tells me they can do nothing other than improve the situation, and yet they failed dismally in this case. I'm not sure whether it's visible, but some of the bindings have been left behind after routing, even though the router bit and bearing setup are exactly the same. This supports my suspicion that the cause of the problems cursing this particular guitar were caused by it not being perfectly level and stable in the cradle when I first cut the channels. What I've just done here is a dry tape up. Should have thought of it earlier. It lets me see at a glance that my tilt fillets need a little bit of extending in that direction and a little bit of extending in that direction. So I can untape it, sand away, tape it up again and check. Likewise, on the cutaway side, the dry tape up is telling me I can take the tiniest bit off the waist, a little bit more off the horn, and quite a lot off the cutaway. It's really good to find that out now rather than after we've glued it up. It's perfect here and here. It's very good here, but we still have a gap here. Let's see how it responds to leveling. As I mentioned earlier, it's perfect at the waist, near perfect at the horn, and a sizable gap at the cutaway. That meant that as I levelled, we have almost gone through the outer layer, so I'm not going to be able to radius that area there. It also means that since I used an accent layer, the thinning of that outer layer is very obvious. What I can't explain is how it looked so good on the dry tape up and then so bad when I actually came to glue it up. That being said, these bindings are better than my previous attempt on this guitar. I feel I'm learning bit by bit, but oh so slowly. And for the purpose of the tonewood comparison video, I can proceed with this build. On my next build, I'd like to experiment with a thinner inner accent layer, which brings the challenge of there not being enough meat on the wood to sand away an adequate tilt bevel. Let's see how we deal with those challenges as they arise. Cheers.